we tried a bunch of interventions, earnest, well-funded, long-term interventions don't seem to work. But neuroscience has been excluded from discussions about what to do about this. And I believe that neuroscience, the progress in neuroscience research has the potential to really dramatically increase the G factor.
Well, that's an optimistic statement, so I'm sure looking forward to some support for that one.
It's optimistic and controversial. And, just as a thought experiment, and I can tell you why I believe this is possible. Well, first, before I tell you the thought experiment, the reason I'm optimistic is that it is because of the high heritability of the G factor. That means, if genes are involved, genes work through biology, even if environment interacts with that. But basically, you have a neurobiological system. It's complex, but as you begin to understand it, you can tweak it. This is what all medicine is doing now. They're trying to understand the neurobiology/genetic basis of our health and our diseases. Why? So they can fix it. So they can, when you go to the doctor, you're going because your biology is broken and you want your biology fixed. Well, let's think about the brain. Now, no one conceptualizes low IQ as a disease, and it's a little dangerous. But to the extent to which low IQ has a genetic input or a genetic influence, that's the extent to which you might be able to find out how that works, what that system is, and then figure out how to tweak that system to increase IQ. It's not science fiction. I mean, that's a plausible sequence of events. What the problem is, it's a very complex sequence of events. But I also think it's a finite set of problems, not an infinite set of problems. So, if physicists can figure out what happened during the first nanoseconds of the Big Bang, we can certainly figure out what the neurobiology of intellect is and how to tweak it. So I think that's possible. So now let's do a thought experiment. And let's imagine there's an IQ pill. And I mean that metaphorically, not literally a pill you could take, like putting, but like having fluoridated water just kind of raises the dental health of everybody. It would be nice if we had that for IQ, but just imagine what it would be like if we shifted the distribution of IQ 15 points into the high end, so that now the average IQ, and I understand how IQ is computed and norming and everything, but the point is that no one would have an IQ less than 100.
Right.
What would the world be like if everyone could reason sufficiently to get a reasonable job?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the what would you call the perverse part of me? It's funny. I was just talking to one of my graduate students. We've been looking at the determinants of male attractiveness by the personality of female viewers. Okay, and so what we found is that there are some personality effects. So extroverted, enthusiastic women tend to rate men, generally speaking, as more attractive than introverted and less enthusiastic women. And so there are some just straight personality effects, but the biggest effect by far we found was the proclivity of women in general to rate men as less attractive as the women's IQ increased. And so the other thing that we don't know is what price we pay for accelerated IQ from a broader perspective, because I know that there is some evidence, and you can tell me what you think about this, because I know that there's reasonable evidence that the average IQ of the Ashkenazi Jewish population is about 15 points higher than the standard population, which kind of makes it a thought experiment or an experiment, real life experiment that's equivalent to the one that you laid out. But Ashkenazi Jews also tend to suffer from a host of neurological diseases that seem to be associated with increased neuroplasticity. And so to me, it's often hard to gain on one front without losing on another. I mean, that's the evolutionary conundrum, obviously, but
We call that the social justice theory. If
yeah,
you
right.
on one thing, you have to be bad on everything else to kind of balance it out.
Yeah, well, generally speaking, you do pay a price for your exceptionalism.
I don't think that's true because the Julian Stanley studies of the mathematically precocious kids essentially found not only were they smart, but they were more mature than their age peers.
Yeah.
They were better looking, they were taller, they were physically more fit. I mean, it was kind of the anti-social.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, I mean, it's just that also might be true because one of the things that can interfere with IQ is poor health and poor nutritional quality and all of that. I mean, it doesn't look like it's that easy to increase IQ, but it looks like it's pretty easy to decrease it.
Yeah, I think that those things have to be pretty extreme.
Yeah.
To have an effect, and those effects may not be permanent, actually. There's some studies of deprivation of people who suffered deprivation during the Second World War that suggest that those really severe deprivations didn't have lasting effects on them.
Well, people are pretty tough, so I'm inclined to agree with that. So have you seen any animal experimental work that you regard as compelling that shows something like the transformation of animal cognition into something that's higher order that you regard as compelling?
Not sure what you mean, but there's certainly animal work that shows you can extract a G factor from cognitive tests given to various animals.
Right. So what I was wondering is, has there been any evidence that you regard as credible showing that could be that so-called animal G factor extracted in the same? We should tell our readers too, the way you extract the G factor, I'm going to say it very, very rapidly, is imagine you take a randomly selected set of 200 questions that require abstraction of one form or another to solve. And then you give those 200 questions to 100 people and you sum the scores and you rank order them. You get something that's roughly equivalent there to a G factor. It's roughly that. So
I would say it a little bit differently, just
okay.
So everyone's on the same page. If you think of all the different mental abilities and you devise a test for each one of them, and you gave this test to a lot of people across the range of ability, what you'll find is the scores on all those tests are positively correlated with each other, suggesting that all tests of mental ability have something in common.
Right, sure, that's a great way of putting it.
Common is this G factor, this general ability to reason. And some individual tests have more G loading than other individual tests.
Right.
So,
yes.
And tests of abstract reasoning tend to be highly G loaded.
Right.
If I said to you, repeat the following numbers back to me, 3, 7, 2, 1, 6, 5, that's not a very highly G-loaded mental ability to be able to do that. But if I gave you a string like that and said, repeat them to me backwards, that becomes a G-loaded ability because you do a transformation.
Yes, well, the other thing to say about that, too, is that the positive relationship between those multiple assessments that you described is actually quite high.
Right.
Right, that's the thing, is that general factor not only exists across domains of cognitive ability, but it tends to account for a substantial amount of the ability in each of those domains. So It's kind of like G is kind of like a black hole for intelligence research, and everything keeps falling into it. So
that's an interesting way to put it, because now we have these genome-wide association studies that are finding these bits of DNA that are related to a latent factor of intelligence, which is the G factor, or to what they call educational attainment variables. Educational attainment is so highly correlated with IQ that it's essentially the same thing. So we're really moving. When I was in graduate school, the question was, is there a genetic component to intelligence or not? To this kind of DNA analysis, trying to find bits of DNA that are going to be related to what we call intelligence or IQ testing or the G factor, and they seem to exist. There seems to be hundreds of them, each a tiny effect, which will make the ultimate story extremely complicated. But as I said before, I think it's a finite set of problems.
Right.
And at the end of that sequence of solving those problems, I think there's a good chance we'll know how to increase IQ. And I think it's a good thing to be able to do that. You know, I've said publicly that more intelligence is better than less.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I get criticized because that implies that people with less intelligence aren't as worthwhile. That's why I want to be very careful that I don't believe that.
Yes,
but
they have harder lives is more the accurate way of thinking about it.
And
harder lives in a narrow range of possibilities and opportunities.
That's right. And in my view, my political bias is, therefore, governments have a moral responsibility to help those people.